Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, June the 30th, 2026. Today, Jupiter moves into Leo, and this is what I want to talk about. And Jupiter in Leo, that is a major sign change. So for the last year and more, Jupiter has been moving through Cancer, and now it's changed signs, and Jupiter will stay in Leo until the end of July next year. And this sign change is going to impact the world at large, and it's also going to impact each of the 12 signs. And so, in this video, for the bulk of this video, I'll be going through each of the 12 signs. And my treatment of the 12 signs will, be something of a hybrid. I will be talking about what is happening today, Tuesday, but I will also be looking ahead, going through each of the 12 and describing how I think Jupiter in Leo might have an impact. So let's start off by looking at the broad astrological picture for today. So here is the chart for today, set for noon New York time on Tuesday, June the 30th, 2026. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So yesterday, when I did the horoscopes for Monday, a broad picture for Monday, I mentioned the fact that there was a full moon, and really there's a full moon today as well. So you can see that the moon is still in Capricorn, and the sun is still in Cancer. So moon and the sun and moon are in opposite signs. Therefore, the full moon is very much in operation. And the exact full moon, well, if you were in the Americas, the exact full moon would have been late on Monday. If you're sort of elsewhere, or at least the vast majority of places elsewhere, then the full moon is sometime today, Tuesday. So the full moon does represent an important part of the lunation cycle. It can be a time when we see the truth. We see the truth for what it is. It's up to us whether we accept the truth or whether we ignore it. I mean, we can ignore the truth even if it's staring us in the face. But I think in most cases we should be ready to be open to that truth, even if that truth isn't entirely pleasant. I'm not saying it's unpleasant, by the way. I mean, truth can be good. We can see the truth of how good things are. It's not just about seeing the truth of how difficult and bad things might be. So truth is quite a neutral concept. This is the full moon. It's where we see the light of the moon. When we see the sun reflects itself on the surface of the moon, and we hopefully see everything as it is, and then we can adjust our approach. Also, of course, the full moon represents the transition from a waxing moon to a waning moon. So generally speaking, the waxing moon is regarded as being relatively fortunate. The moon is getting bigger. It's about growth and development, whereas the waning moon is getting smaller. It's past its peak, and it might well be, given that the moon is now waning and Mercury is retrograde, that now might not be a particularly good time to start new projects. If you want to start a new project, well, ideally perhaps you should wait until Mercury goes direct and after the new moon. So that's something I've been sort of thinking about, because I was thinking of having memberships to this channel, and I kind of thinking I kind of missed my chance now, because now Mercury's retrograde, and we've got a waning moon, or at least by the time I get myself together, the moon will be waning, because I'm making this video on Monday morning. So the moon is. I don't think the full moon is not quite there yet, but so I'm thinking about this. But I do have my moon in Aries, and maybe I'll just go and do it anyway. I'll start with Mercury retrograde and a waning moon, and it'll all end up as a disaster anyway. That's something for me to think about. Now, the moon does make a square to Saturn. I mean, that's the main lunar aspect. You can see that. So, this is perhaps a reminder that this lunation is this full moon, is linked to Saturn and Neptune. And so, if you're thinking about moon square Saturn, there could be a moment of realization. We thought things were fine, and then the moon squares Saturn, and we realize we've hit a bit of a block. And so, what are we going to do now? That could be something of a problem. But we've got to be open-minded, and we've got to be tolerant. And you could say that the full moon is kind of like an opposition, and you've got Saturn on the T, and so we have to approach this full moon, with a disciplined and realistic approach. And additionally, we've got Mars making a square to the nodal axis. So Mars is at early Gemini, making a square to the north node in early Pisces, square to the south node in early Virgo. And with Mars square the nodes, we have to be careful how we assert ourselves. It's possible with Mars squaring the nodes that we assert ourselves in a way that is just not right. We go about things in the wrong way. Maybe we get inappropriately angry, or we show our frustrations, and that's not necessarily the right thing to do. But you could argue that the nodes represent other people, society at large, and so there's a lot of energy there. People are trying to meet different people, make connections. Sometimes they do it in a way that is rather clumsy and hasty, but some people are trying. So socially there is activity, though the activity might sometimes be a little tense. And additionally, we've got Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune. So Venus is 135 degrees from Neptune, 3/8 of the circle. So with Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune, it may be that some people are misleading. Venus represents other people, perhaps, relationships. Neptune is about deception, getting the wrong idea about other people, misinterpreting what they say. Venus, if one links Venus with money, we shouldn't necessarily make assumptions about money. We might think we want to spend some money, or we might do something with money, and it might not be the right idea. So be a little bit careful there, and just don't think that things are as clear as they seem in a financial sense. I will now look at Jupiter in Leo. Well, before I look at Jupiter in Leo, I want to just look at the picture for Sydney, Australia, and look at the heliocentric chart. So it won't take very long. So here is the chart for Sydney, Australia. So if we set it for noon, so no, actually that's a heliocentric chart. Sorry. If we, there's a chart for noon in Sydney. As a representative of Australia and New Zealand, and so yesterday, Monday, I talked about the full moon. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then the full moon is on Tuesday. You can see that at noon Sydney time, the moon is just past the opposition of the sun. So that would be sort of late morning on today, Tuesday. But you'd have the full moon bit later if you're in New Zealand. So a very full moon day in Australasia and East Asia. You perhaps can really feel it, and all the things I've said about the full moon. There's perhaps a moment of awareness. You see things as they are. And if you see things as they are, then you are in a position to take action, perhaps to take action to protect yourself, perhaps to take action because you now understand the situation and you are able to act on the basis of knowledge rather than just vague assumptions. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. So the Earth is still making a square to Saturn. I mean, I've already talked about that. I mean, I think that there is quite a Saturnine feel to today, a feeling that it's just difficult to get things done. And additionally, we have a very close Jupiter-Pluto opposition. I think now today is the heliocentric Jupiter-Pluto opposition. From a geocentric point of view, the Jupiter-Pluto opposition isn't for another 3 weeks, I think. So this Jupiter-Pluto opposition, is just wanting things to be better. Things just aren't quite good enough, and we want to take things further, and we want to just push things until we really get what we can, we get what we want, and that can be very useful. We should not be satisfied with second best. We should want things to be as good as possible, but sometimes it's possible to go too far. We want perfection. We want to push ourselves to a point of complete exhaustion. So that is a way in which this Jupiter-Pluto opposition might work. And this Jupiter-Pluto opposition is just tied in with Mars. You can see there's a T-square, a Jupiter heliocentric T-square, Jupiter opposition Pluto, with Mars on the T. And so that's quite an angry T-square. And yeah, people doing what they can, whatever they can, to get their way and to make the absolute most of the resources available to them. And now I want to one thing. Venus is exactly opposition Chiron. Venus opposition Chiron, that may say something about relationships, strange relationships, people having unusual ideas about relationships. Anyway, let's now talk about Jupiter in Leo. So here is the chart for the moment Jupiter does change sign, and it takes place today, Tuesday. I think it's at 6:52:22 a.m. London time. So if you're in California, that would mean late on Monday. Jupiter would change sign. If you're in New York or the New York time zone, that would be about 1:52 in the morning. So it's here. And so when we look at Jupiter in Leo, there is the question of how significant it really is. We shouldn't assume just because Jupiter is in Leo that everything is just suddenly going to change. It might not, and so let's not exaggerate. And I think that with Jupiter in Leo, if we want to really know how Jupiter in Leo is going to work, we should probably be looking at the rest of the planets. What kind of aspects Jupiter makes. But that's Jupiter in Leo in a general sense. Now, for most of this video, I'll be going through the 12 signs, and I'll be talking about what Jupiter in Leo means for each of the 12 signs. But what I'm doing in this part of the video is I'm trying to come up with some general view of what it might mean for Jupiter to be in Leo. So the first question might be, is it a good thing for Jupiter to be in Leo? Does Jupiter strengthen if it's in Leo compared to Cancer? Well, the answer is clearly no. I mean, Jupiter was exalted in Cancer. It is not exalted in Leo. Jupiter does, however, rule the fiery triplicity. So Jupiter in Leo is in a fire sign. Jupiter rules the fire signs by night, not by day. So it could be, all things being equal, that Jupiter in Leo is fortunate for inspired night work. Maybe we're going to be most inspired when we are working in the hours of darkness, because that's when Jupiter is strongest, when it's in Leo. In the hours of day, not quite so strong. It doesn't have that kind of strength, and so Jupiter of course is a fire sign. So Jupiter's moving into a fire sign. So there's always going to be a traditional planet in a fire sign. We're not going to get a situation between now and the end of July of next year when we have no fire in the horoscope. When I say no fire, I'm talking about the traditional planets in a fire sign, and so that may mean that the year ahead there's always going to be something to inspire us. We won't perhaps get those moments of just what is going on. It's all so flat. There's nothing to motivate us. So that constant motivation, it's always there, at some level. And so perhaps that is something fortunate about Jupiter moving into Leo. So in that sense, I would have said that Jupiter in Leo moving into Leo is a good thing, although theoretically Jupiter does weaken as it moves out of Cancer and into Leo. But as far as this particular movement through Leo, let's just get an idea of how it works through. So today Jupiter moves into Leo. That's the first thing that happens, and then what happens is it keeps going through Leo, and it goes retrograde at the end of the year. I think on December the 13th at 27 degrees Leo. So it goes right the way through Leo, really fast. It almost gets into Leo. It almost gets into Virgo, but then it goes retrograde at 27 Virgo, and it just keeps going retrograde until April the 13th. So it goes as far back as 17 Leo on April the 13th of next year. Then it goes direct and goes on and on through Leo, and then on, I think it's July the 26th of next year, it moves into Virgo. So we've got over a year of Jupiter moving through Jupiter moving through Leo. So what does it mean with Jupiter in Leo with reference to some of the other planets? And Jupiter, when it moves into Leo, it makes some potentially quite important aspects to outer planets. I mean, I've already mentioned them, and I will certainly be going into more detail about them in future videos. But Jupiter, the thing that perhaps we should be really looking at is the fact that Jupiter, when it goes through Leo, it goes into Leo. Well, it starts making an opposition to Pluto. It also starts making a sextile to Uranus, and it starts making a trine to Neptune at a time when Uranus is sextile Neptune and Neptune is sextile Pluto. So Jupiter is kind of completing at the end of July this really quite amazing formation. And I know a lot of astrologers are already talking about it. I think they call it, what do they call it? They call it Barbeau's basket. So Andre Barbeau was a French astrologer who died quite recently, and he looked at sort of outer planet configurations, and he sort of connected them with broad sort of generational changes, and Apparently he was famous for, one of the things he did was predicted the COVID epidemic. And yeah, a lot of astrologers are getting very excited about it, suggesting that, when Jupiter makes this basket, when Jupiter, because you're going to have all these planets at 5 degrees, Jupiter at 5 degrees, Leo, Neptune 5 degrees Aries, Uranus 5 degrees Gemini, Pluto at 5 degrees Aquarius, that it's going to represent something really spectacular, that's going to really change everything, potentially in quite a positive way. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. I don't think we wanted to read too much into that. I'm going to give it certainly going to give it some more thought. But it is true that the end of this month, the end of July, there is this quite spectacular thing going on, and of course Jupiter is making that a geocentric opposition to Pluto. So I've just shown you that we've got a heliocentric opposition between Jupiter and Pluto. Now we've got the heliocentric opposition, and in a few weeks' time we'll have the geocentric opposition. And Jupiter is also making a trine to Saturn, and this trine to Saturn is that's exact not this month. It's exact. I think it's exact on September the 1st. So it's still applying to a trine to Saturn, and I know that there's a lot of pessimism about the markets. It's all over the place that the markets are, about to collapse and so on and so on. Maybe they are. I don't know. I don't regard myself as being an expert on, financial astrology, but we are at the stage of the sort of Jupiter-Saturn cycle, when the few years before the opposition, which tends to be quite positive. You think about, 2005, 2006, around then, before the 2007, Bear Stearns and the financial crisis, the markets were moving up quite a lot, and things look good. And you look at 20 years before, what was that? 20 years before that, in the sort of I don't know. You think about the late. The mid to late 80s, before the 1987 crash, sort of 1985, 86, things were looking good in the economy. In the UK, you had the Big Bang, you had the Reagan boom, then you got the 60s, I think the sort of mid 60s were pretty benign environments. So, historically, this Jupiter-Saturn trine does tend to be quite fortunate, as Jupiter is moving towards the opposition. You see, so what's happening is that Jupiter it will make that opposition in 2029. I think that opposition is going to be pretty bad, when Saturn is in Taurus and Jupiter is in Scorpio. But before that opposition, that trine, that sort of waxing trine, if you treat you put Jupiter and Saturn, you treat them like the lunation cycle. You've got the new Jupiter and Saturn conjunct in 2020, and now they're at the trine. Logically, this is quite a favourable stage of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. Now, this time round, it may be different, but it just might be that with Jupiter moving into Leo, there is actually some optimism, at least short-term optimism, about the way things are going. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom. And as far as other things concern, Jupiter making that opposition to Pluto is, we want things to be better. We want improvements, and Jupiter sextile Uranus. Well, you think Jupiter sextile Uranus, great feeling maybe of relief. Ebertin says about Jupiter-Uranus contacts, they are the thank the Lord aspect. And so maybe things aren't so bad, and maybe over the course of July, things will improve. But I'm aware that there are other things going on. I am aware that on July the 4th there is a conjunction between Mars and Uranus. I mean, that Mars conjunct Uranus, I think that is a really difficult energy, really difficult. I mean, I know it's not nothing to do with Jupiter and Saturn, but I don't think we should forget about that Mars-Uranus aspect, and so it's very difficult if to look at things in isolation. And when you notice in astrology, when you notice a pattern, the moment you notice a pattern, that pattern often breaks. Okay, you could say that is a pattern of every time Uranus moves into Gemini, America finds itself at war. Okay, that has worked throughout America's history. But maybe this time round, the United States is not going to find itself involved in a major war. I don't regard its conflict with Iran and Ukraine as so far representing its conflict with Iran and Russia. I mean, the United States is effectively in some kind of phony war with Russia at the moment. But yeah, I wouldn't regard that as a full-scale war right now. And so it is difficult to look at things in isolation, and one should really try and avoid doing that. But in the past, the waxing Jupiter-Saturn trine tends to have been fortunate for the markets and for the world, but yeah, this time might be different. And then there's a question about Jupiter in Leo. What does it mean for Jupiter to be in Leo? Can we really generalize Jupiter in Leo? It's hard, but maybe it's possible. And as Jupiter moves through Leo, maybe we need to we can start to look at different things. So, thinking about the 1960s, Jupiter was in Leo in 1967, 1968. And so if we think about what does that mean? Here, for example, is the chart for, I believe, the first performance at the Monterey Pop Festival. The Monterey International Pop Festival? Major iconic event. All the sort of icons of the 1960s came together in 1967, and the summer of 1967 was the summer of love. Kind of very focused on San Francisco and the Bay Area, and there you see Jupiter at 4 degrees Leo, and so that is an aspect of Leo. You think all of these, or at least many of these icons, they had Pluto in Leo. That Pluto in Leo generation, were in their 20s, in the prime of their lives, and so that perhaps is Jupiter in Leo perhaps at its most benign, and it seemed to be sort of forward thinking, and also Jupiter in Leo, there is a focus on the individual, these sort of rock icons. You have the icons of the 60s. And the summer of love, Jupiter and Venus, both in Leo. Like now, I don't think quite now, 2026, summer of love is particularly fitting. And it's often said, I believe, that with the 60s, that the 60s peaked in 1967, and by 1968, it was like an overexposed photograph, and Jupiter was still in Leo in 1968. But I think there was a march was it in San Francisco called the Death of the Hippie March in 1968. So by 1968, the 60s had already peaked. And of course, in 1968, you perhaps started to see maybe the dark side of Jupiter in Leo. So, for example, we had the shooting of Martin Luther King on April the 4th, 1968, when Jupiter was at 26 degrees Leo. And you might say that is the focus on the individual. Jupiter was on Regulus here. Now, so when you think about Regulus, the royal star Regulus at the end of Leo, you might say, well, Regulus is about kingship, it's about prominence, but it's a bit of a shooting star, you know. I mean, I don't mean that in terms of guns, but it kind of has you know, major prominence, but it all can perhaps come crashing down to earth. So, you know, when you think about Jupiter on Regulus, there's a little bit of a hint here that Jupiter can be about death. And maybe Jupiter on Regulus, you know, Jupiter, well, you could say, argue, you know, death of the king. But you know, Jupiter was a couple of degrees off Regulus. And of course, another famous person who was shot in 1968 was Bobby Kennedy. Again, Jupiter close to Regulus. Jupiter much closer to Regulus. You know, Jupiter pretty much exactly on Regulus. And so this might give us an idea about the sort of the dark side of Jupiter in Leo, but maybe it is Regulus that we should be thinking about, because Jupiter is not on Regulus right now. I mean, Jupiter's just gone into Leo. We're not going to see Jupiter conjunct Regulus. Well, in fact, the exact conjunction between Jupiter and Regulus next year will happen just as Jupiter moves into Virgo, because Regulus has processed into Virgo. And Jupiter in Leo could perhaps represent just a single event. And Jupiter went into Leo on the 17th of July, 1931. In fact, yeah, it went into this exact day. July the 17th, 1931. Jupiter went into Leo. And there was a film being made called Scarface. Not the Scarface, the more recent film of Scarface, but this was a 1931 film called Scarface. I don't really know what the film was about. But on that day, there was an accident on the film set where some dynamite caps, which were used for special effects, exploded, and someone lost an eye. And that might be fitting. Jupiter in Leo. Jupiter moves into a fire sign. I mean, Jupiter in Leo, you think, you know, that is a sort of film set, film stars making a film, and someone losing an eye, and and you've got a film called Scarface, and so that is unfortunately rather fitting. But it could be Jupiter moving into Leo just represents a single event. And when you do have Jupiter in Leo, you know, Leo is it is a dynamic aspect. Sorry, it's a dynamic. Leo is quite a dynamic sign. And so when Jupiter moves into Leo, this is the big moment. You think of Leo, fire, action, bangs. It's got to happen. This is the big movement. And in the Second World War, Jupiter moved into Leo in 1943. And in fact, it moved into Leo the summer of 1943. And there were, in July, I think it was July 1943. And so if you look at beginning of July 1943, on July the 5th, July the 5th of the year, you can see Jupiter's just at 0 degrees Leo. This was the beginning of the Battle of Kursk. So this was a major battle in the Second World War, which huge tank battle, which was a bit touch and go. But the Soviets won this tank battle, and basically once the Soviets had won Kursk, it was all downhill, and then you had Operation Bagration, and the whole front collapsed for the Germans, and so that's how Jupiter in Leo might have worked. And it wasn't also in July of 1943, as Jupiter was moving into Leo, we had the landings in Sicily. So the Allied landings in Sicily happened just a few days later. I mean, I don't know quite what time to go for the landings. This is the actual beach landings in Sicily, and so Jupiter was at 1 degree 56 Leo. So that's that just gives us the idea. It's quite it is quite sort of action orientated. Jupiter in Leo. Now, Jupiter in Leo, you could say at its worst, or one of the bad ways in which you could look at Jupiter in Leo is, it is about the concept of dictatorship, the great leader, or perhaps the recognition of the great leader. And if you think about the German dictator, if you think about him, he wasn't really taken very seriously, after the First World War. Not really. Immediately after the First World War, he was he was rambling. And no one took him seriously. And then, things changed. Maybe it wasn't that he changed. It meant, the world around him changed. And what seemed like rambling suddenly made a lot of sense. So here is the horoscope for his first speech, which he made on October the 16th, 1919. Now, Jupiter was actually it hadn't just gone into Leo, it was in the middle of Leo. In fact, Jupiter was moving towards the sesquiquadrate of the Aries point, and so he got upset about someone. He went to this meeting. He was supposed to be an agent of the military, spying on the German Workers' Party. But he couldn't help himself. He just stood up and said something and impressed everyone. And so this was a first political speech. And so this took place in Munich, and it was devastating. He was immediately recognized. And so that might be how Jupiter in Leo works. Immediate recognition. This is a moment where, while Jupiter is in Leo, people are looking for the great dictator. They're looking for a leader. They're looking for someone to articulate their fears and frustrations and everything else. So what I'm trying to demonstrate is that Jupiter in Leo can work in many different ways. You've got the benign and naive way, what we saw with the Summer of Love in 1967. You can see it as a single one-off accident, like we saw in 1931 with that film Scarface. You can see it as we saw in 1919 when just people are looking for something, and if someone can provide it, they get loads of attention and they can be catapulted to global infamy. And so we shouldn't be too sort of single-minded about it, and perhaps also Jupiter in Leo is going to work differently depending on what part of the sign. So right at the end of the sign, Jupiter is Jupiter's going to be close to Regulus, and Regulus, I know it's the royal star, but as we saw with Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, it can be quite a dangerous place for Jupiter to be. So anyway, those are a few thoughts on Jupiter in Leo, and now I want to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, June the 30th, 2026. Aries. There is a lot going on at the moment. We've just had the full moon, moon in Capricorn, opposition the sun in Cancer. And, this full moon for you, as I was describing yesterday, does matter. It's about, your feeling about, where you want to go. Are you going in the right direction? Are you going to be able to take people with you? What about, other pressures? For example, your family, your home, even just your own memories and your recognition of the past. Sometimes, you forget the past, you think you can ignore the past, and then the past crops up when you least expect it, and it can, in certain cases, stop you in your tracks. And we don't just have a full moon. We have Mars, your ruler, making a square to the nodal axis. So what's happened is that, Mars has just changed sign. It's moved into Gemini, and it's now making a square to the north node and a square to the south node. And this square really does talk about some kind of decision. I mean, we know that, Mars is in Gemini, and Mars is in a sign that is connected with choice. I mean, that's Gemini. Which way do I turn? Do I do this, or do I do that, or do I try and do both? And what do I do? And it might well be that you're faced with a dilemma. You could do one thing, you could do the other thing, and when you're talking about dilemmas, it's often the case that one says, well, maybe both choices are the same, or it's not a question of right and wrong. You make the choice you feel right with. But I think it's more serious than that. I do think, Aries, that you may be confronted with a right choice and a wrong choice. You could choose wrong. And the question is, how do you make that decision? I think that it might be a case where the choice that is most straightforward, that seems easiest, where everything is kind of laid out in front of you in a comprehensible way, might actually be the wrong choice. And the right choice might be something, more complicated, perhaps more emotional, more personal. And I'm not saying that you should rush ahead with anything, particularly as Mercury is now retrograde. So of course, with Mercury retrograde, it's not a good time to be making choices. But Mercury is retrograde quite a lot, and sometimes you have to make choices in spite of Mercury being retrograde, though maybe you don't have to completely commit yourself for another few weeks. But there is an issue here about which direction do you go down, and in the process of all this, there may be issues, surrounding faith. I mean, Aries, you would like to believe certain things. You'd like to believe that certain things were possible, and there's no reason why they can't be possible. But if you're going to do something completely out of faith, you just you're going to trust yourself to get it right, then you've got to give it everything, and you have kind of got to make a commitment. I mean, that is, if you like, the contradiction of faith. So if you believe in something and you follow it, but you follow it in a half-hearted kind of way, then probably you're not going to be successful. On the other hand, if you give it everything you've got, you decide which way you're going to go, you do give it everything you've got, and it does go wrong, then you might be in trouble. So, what do you do? I mean, I can't tell you exactly what to do. And in the end, that is up to you. But I do think that you have to start making decisions. And there's nothing wrong with having faith. But if you really believe that something is possible, then you've got to give it everything, and just perhaps hope for the best. And sometimes hoping for the best is okay. And you could say, Aries, that the main thing going on right now is Jupiter changing sign. So today Jupiter moves into Leo, and it stays in Leo until the end of July next year. Now, I'm of the view that Jupiter moving into Leo for you is a good thing. yes, it's a good thing. There was nothing wrong with Jupiter moving through Cancer, and hopefully, while Jupiter was moving through Cancer, you had an opportunity to stabilize things, decide what was important to you. In certain cases, it might have been a time to be sort of putting down roots, to give yourself security, make yourself comfortable, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. But you can't stay in that state forever. And with Jupiter moving into Leo, moving into a fire sign, this is a time to be starting to think about what you can do. For you, Aries, when Jupiter is in Leo, it's a time that is really very individualistic. It's not about trying to please the crowd, and so in that sense, it's something that is completely consistent with the Aries way of being. You are an individual. I'm not just saying that. I mean, that is really a trait of the average Aries. You want to do things your way. If other people don't approve, they disagree with you, well, so what? And so Jupiter moving through Leo really does emphasize this. It emphasizes, what you can do, and you need to find something that you feel really good about. And perhaps this is how we can see Jupiter moving from Cancer to Leo. So while Jupiter was in Cancer, Aries, you had a chance to settle, to be comfortable with yourself, to be confident, to know that nothing bad was going to happen, to know, that you might have sort of firm roots, and because you had that confidence, you were able to perhaps start to think about doing something different, but not just different for the sake of it, different because it was important to you, and you had something very particular that you wanted to do. And with Jupiter and Leo, you're able to really do it extremely well. And it's a process to begin with. As Jupiter moves into Leo, it might not feel 100% easy. You're still getting used to the situation, and there might be worries. Are you really doing the right thing? Can you really trust yourself to be an individual? Do you have the resources to be an individual? Jupiter, as when it moves through Leo, it starts making a square to Chiron, and so square to Chiron, there might be residual concerns. Do you have what it takes? Do you have the resources? Do you have the money? Whatever it is that you want to worry about, you might worry about it, but it shouldn't hold you back. And we're not talking about anything that needs approval. If you get approval, that's great, but it is optional. And if you're doing things, on your own, but you're feeling good about it, then that's fine. And ideally, with Jupiter in Leo, it can be a time to be really enjoying yourself. You can find real enjoyment in what you're doing. Whatever that might be. Now, we don't want to completely exaggerate the individual nature of this. You don't have to completely cut yourself off from the rest of humanity. And with Jupiter moving through Leo, you might find that you are in a position where you can be an intermediary, a neutral intermediary. I know this sounds a bit sort of different and a bit sort of weird in terms of what I've been saying so far, but perhaps you can find your inner diplomat while Jupiter is moving through Leo. It's not about compromising. It's just about allowing one party to talk with another party, and you might find yourself, over the next year and more, to be in the middle, or to be passing messages, and you can do it in a way that is very spontaneous and easy, and the less stress things are, the better, and the less aggravation you run into, then the easier it is for everyone. And so if you're in a situation where people aren't talking to each other, people are almost at war with one another, then Aries, I think you can do something about it. And of course, we are living in times of great sort of division and hostility, and you, Aries, you want to sort of move above and beyond it all, and if you can bring people together, well, so much the better. And so that is certainly something to look forward to, and you have an opportunity here, Aries, to create stability and to be able to assert your control. I mean, after all, Jupiter, the moment it moves into Leo, it starts making a trine to Saturn, and in a couple of months' time, we have Jupiter trine Saturn. I think that Jupiter trine Saturn, is it on the 1st of September? I think it is. So that Jupiter trine Saturn is important, because don't forget that Saturn is in your sign. So let me just check this. I'm pretty sure it's the 1st of September that Jupiter trine Saturn. Jupiter trine Saturn. Yeah, it looks like the 1st of September. So in a couple of months' time, with Jupiter trine Saturn, you can create stability. You can assert yourself, but in a way that other people are not going to resist. And certain people need discipline, and I know, Aries, you don't necessarily regard yourself as being a disciplinarian, someone who wants to bring everyone under your control, but sometimes it is needed. And so if there is a difficult situation, or a situation where people don't know what they're doing, they seem confused, they seem worried, they seem angry, then Aries, I think you do have a chance to sort it out. Now, Jupiter moving through Leo, it could say something about relationships, and there is a view in astrology that the 5th house is connected with romance, perhaps. I mean, I think it's kind of quite an old view. I mean, I know there were big arguments about it in the astrological community, certainly in the traditional view, from a traditional perspective. Going back to the sort of the 80s, traditional astrologers would argue about the 5th house and saying, is it about love? Is it about relationships? Or has it got nothing to do with relationships? So there is that argument. And the 5th house is not the same as the 7th house. And as far as relationships are concerned, it would be about enjoying someone's company. It's not necessarily about a long-term relationship, but it can be about a relationship where you and the other person can enjoy the moment. What happens after the moment, well, that's another matter. So as far as is possible, with Jupiter in Leo, if you and another person can live for the moment and complement each other, then that might mean that it can work well. If you are looking for romantic satisfaction, then if that's really what you're looking for, then I think that Jupiter in Leo can help. Taurus. The big event from a Taurean perspective today is Jupiter moving into Leo, and Jupiter stays in Leo until the end of July next year. So for over a year. And Jupiter matters in Leo for you because Jupiter is a fixed. Jupiter is moving into a fixed sign. Leo is fixed. Taurus is fixed. And from your perspective, Leo is arguably the real foundations of the matter. It is what is important. And, for the average Taurean, foundations do matter. You want to be secure. You want to know that, everything is going to be fine. And, additionally, that whatever you're doing in the present and whatever your plans for the future, you are linked to the past. Perhaps you're linked to a tradition. And in the process, you're perhaps thinking about your family. I mean, being part of a group, like a family, I think is going to matter to you. And the material side of things is also important. Like the home, having a relationship with your own home, feeling comfortable in your own home, and it's becoming really important that you're just living somewhere that is in accord with your ideas and your sense of harmony. And so over the next year and more, many Taurans are going to be thinking very hard about where they are living, and they're going to have probably quite high expectations. So, if your home is not good enough, and when I say your home, it might be your own home, it might be a home you rent, whatever the situation. If it's not good enough, you're going to want to make changes. I mean, that is natural. And that might mean that some Taurans feel that they have to move because it's just not in accord with your changing expectations, or you want to just change what your home looks like. Jupiter is moving through Leo. I mean, Leo, is quite a sort of grandiose kind of sign, and one word that's often connected with Leo is proud. So you might say, home proud, pride in your own home. Your own home should perhaps look a particular way. So, some Taurans might feel that it's a good time to do, decorations or rebuilding, and so on. I'm not necessarily saying that's a good idea, but it might be, the way you feel. And, if your business is anything to do with real estate, or you own a second home or a third or a fourth or a fifth home, then Jupiter moving through Leo could be particularly important. Now, when we think about Jupiter, we're probably thinking about something fortunate, but it's also just an area that you might want to expand in. So, some Taurans might respond to Jupiter in Leo by buying more houses. I mean, okay, that seems extreme, but that's the average Taurus. They like material things, and if they own a lot of houses, well, that's good. At least it seems to be good. I think you have to be perhaps a little careful in that area, because Jupiter can overdo things. And what you shouldn't forget, and I'm not giving any financial advice here, I'm not making any forecasts about business cycles and so on, I mean, at least in terms of your own interest, but you just shouldn't forget that next year, end of July, Jupiter does move into Virgo. And that change is quite major. Leo is a sign where Jupiter works fairly well, particularly by night, because Jupiter rules the fire signs by night. The Sun rules the fire signs by day. But then Jupiter moving into Virgo, I mean, Jupiter is in its detriment in Virgo. And Jupiter in Virgo, that may say something about the business cycle. You don't want to be in a situation, I don't think, where you take on too much while Jupiter is in Leo, and then come Jupiter in Virgo, you realize this. So perhaps you should resist the temptation to over accumulate. And so, I mean, that's certainly something you really need to think about. But still, if property is part of your business, or a way in which you make money, it could suddenly become very, very important to you. In terms of your attention and just aesthetically, what matters. And okay, we could be a little bit more obscure about it. I mean, the fourth house, because it is the fourth house. Jupiter is moving through your fourth house because Leo is the fourth house from Taurus. The fourth house can be linked with the land. It can be linked with agriculture. It can be linked with mining. Are you a mining engineer? Probably not. I just can't really imagine a mining engineer watching my videos. But maybe I've got the wrong idea about mining engineers. I mean, I shouldn't try to stereotype my audience. But yeah, if you are a mining engineer, then I think that Jupiter in Leo could really work very well for you. But if not, well, there's still the land to consider. And tending this land, and it might be a time, for example, where Taurians want to think about agriculture, even if it's very low-key agriculture. Maybe you've got a plot of land, and you've been thinking about this land, or you needn't own this land. Maybe you have access to some land. And you can plant things in it. I think that you would gain a great deal from that. And so I think it is really quite powerful, Jupiter moving through Leo, and I think that you can really boost your feelings of security between now and the end of July of next year. But it's just important that you don't overdo it. You don't overcommit yourself. And that particularly relates to perhaps investment. I mean, maybe just putting too much money into something without thinking it through. Because Jupiter is excessive. But again, I must emphasize, I'm not giving financial advice here. I'm really not. This is for entertainment purposes only. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to just look at the potential of Jupiter moving through Leo in as many different ways as possible. So what I've been talking about here is a sort of a wider trend. I've been looking at the next sort of year and more. As far as today is concerned, you're still getting to grips with the full moon. So sort of the full moon, it might have been today, it might have been yesterday if you're in the Americas, and the moon is still in Capricorn, and with the moon in Capricorn, Taurus, I think that you are trying to sort of move beyond something, and it's just easy to just focus on the facts, the details as they appear to be on the surface, but you have, as far as possible, got to try to go beyond it all, and to look at new possibilities and new ways of expressing your freedom, because freedom does matter to you, Taurus, and you don't want to be just tied to one thing. And it might be today that you feel that you can get involved in some kind of unique and very personal act of rebellion. Now, when I say rebellion, I don't mean anything connected with confrontation. I'm not saying that. It's just you, in your quiet way, deciding that you want to do something differently. And this rebellion could in fact be connected with the fact that Chiron has quite recently gone into your sign. It's still really early in Taurus, and in fact Chiron is making a square to Jupiter. So that's what happened. And as Jupiter moves into Leo, it makes that square to Chiron, and you're starting to get a sense of your individuality and how you express this individuality, and there could be something rebellious about it, especially if you run into resistance. But it's quite a personal kind of rebellion, and I don't think that you need to see things in terms of absolute conflicts. It's not quite like that. And turning to the issue of relationships, at the moment, you are quite a calming influence, and I think that people are going to enjoy your company. You know how to get people to relax and to perhaps let go of some of their worries, but it's probably a bad idea to get too close to certain people. Certain people can be very confusing at the moment. And it may be difficult to know quite what they're planning, quite what motivates them. And if you take what they say at face value, you might trip yourself up. It doesn't. It's not when the situation is not helped, by the way, given that Mercury is retrograde. With Mercury going retrograde, people can say all sorts of things, and sometimes Taurus, you can take what people say at face value, and I think that would be a bad idea. I don't think it's a situation where people are necessarily lying to you, but they may be promising things that they really can't deliver on. So when it comes to relationships, particularly with people you don't know very well, I think that you do have to tread carefully. Gemini. So Mercury is now retrograde. Okay, it went retrograde yesterday on Monday, but you're still getting used to it, I think. And with Mercury retrograde, it's perhaps becoming clear that things are not entirely straightforward, and at times it just might be quite difficult to get things together, and you yourself might be quite indecisive. You'd like to be able to sort things out, and you make a decision. You thought you were ready to make a decision not so long ago, but now it's just not so easy. You might have felt, Gemini, that you were really moving towards something, that something was coming together, and then suddenly it's just disappearing in front of your eyes, at least for the moment. And it's important, not to panic. Just because you've lost something, because you've lost touch with something, it doesn't mean it's gone forever. And it might be that just later in the northern hemisphere summer or southern hemisphere winter, you have a chance to get back in touch. So don't panic. But with Mercury going retrograde, you should be thinking perhaps about the financial side of things. Perhaps you'd made some assumptions about money, and these assumptions are not necessarily correct. Maybe you're dealing with a situation where someone has overpromised, or you've conned yourself into believing something, or believing that something was possible, and now you're beginning to recognize, or hopefully beginning to recognize, that it's just not necessarily going to be so easy. And in this light, don't take what you're told at face value. People can say anything. They're just saying something to I don't know, to perhaps take advantage of a situation, or some people don't want to seem confused. They want to seem definite, but there's no reason to listen too hard to any one person. In fact, it's just probably, Gemini, just a bad time to be making, firm decisions. So, that's something that you need to be aware of. And going back to money, don't forget, we have a full moon. Okay, the full moon might have been yesterday, but this full moon is very much in operation. Moon in Capricorn is still opposition the sun, and perhaps there are things you hadn't understood, at least in a financial sense, and the truth is certainly available to you. But Gemini, you don't want to sort of kid yourself. I mean, Geminis can, they see the truth, but then they don't see the truth. They persuade themselves that they're not looking at the truth, and they kind of forget that they saw the truth, and then suddenly they have to confront the truth all over again. So with money, just try to be as realistic as possible. Now, another thing we've got going on is the fact that we have got Jupiter moving into Leo, and Jupiter moving into Leo, you could say is a good thing. I mean, I know that Jupiter in Cancer Jupiter was exalted in Cancer, but I mean, from a Gemini viewpoint, Cancer can be a bit boring. I mean, even though Jupiter's exalted there, because it can be about just having to think about money, but the money just didn't go away entirely, at least for many Geminis. The financial sword of Damocles perhaps might have felt that it was always hanging over you. I'm not suggesting that the sword of Damocles has just magically gone away, but there are perhaps other things to be thinking about, or even to be obsessing about. And with Jupiter moving into Leo, it is a time when you perhaps need to think about your message. How actually are you getting your message across? Now, Gemini is a very talkative, communicative sign, and you might think that the average Gemini has no problems communicating. But, me being a Gemini myself, I often have terrible problems communicating. At least I think I do. And I trying to reach out to a wider audience, that's hard work. It's really hard work. And perhaps now with Jupiter moving into Leo, there is perhaps another chance to think about how you are getting your message across. Perhaps the mistakes you have been making. Perhaps you've made things too complicated. Perhaps you've been talking to the wrong people. Perhaps you've just been focusing on the wrong subjects. So that is something that you can perhaps start concentrating on. With Jupiter moving through Leo, and when you think about what you are saying and what you are trying to do, it might occur to you, Gemini, that you haven't got all the answers, and that you should have all the answers. And that can sometimes be a Gemini issue. You don't like to be caught out. You don't like to be shown to be ignorant. Certainly, I don't like to be shown to be ignorant. I hate it, but it does happen. I kind of realise that I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'd like to talk about things, but if I don't know what I'm talking about, well, there's a problem, isn't there? So, what you can do in that situation is you can fill in the gaps. And with Jupiter moving through Leo, there may be a learning side to it. It might be about just education. I'm not saying you have to go on courses, or go to college or go to university. I'm not saying anything like that. You can learn about things, in your own way, and you know what you need. And so if you read books or watch YouTube videos, whatever you need to do to learn, or just talk to people, I think you'll pick up information very quickly. And Geminis are good at that. I mean, Geminis can pick up the basics very quickly. And being a Gemini, you tend to know what you don't know, even if you don't admit it. So if you pick up the basics of something, you'll know where the gaps are, and so you can then make an effort to know even more about it. So perhaps Jupiter in Leo might encourage you to develop some depth, perhaps an in-depth knowledge about a particular subject that right now might be becoming important to you. And additionally, with Jupiter in Leo, do think about your surroundings. I've already indicated that I think right now your communication skills are very good, and I think they're going to stay good, on and off between now and the end of July next year, because after all, Jupiter stays in Leo for over a year. And so think about all the people you could be communicating with who you haven't so far talked to. Maybe you just weren't in the mood. Maybe you thought you'd get a negative response. But there are certain people who shouldn't be forgotten. In particular, think about maybe your neighbours or members of your family. When I say members of your family, I'm thinking not so much your sort of immediate family, like parents, for example. I'm thinking of maybe cousins, maybe siblings, but also neighbours. I know neighbours aren't necessarily members of your family, but have you talked to your neighbours recently? And it might be that if you make an effort, not much of an effort, but maybe some simple act of generosity, it's not it's not like going to cost you anything. Maybe it's just emotional generosity, being nice to your neighbour, doing something for your neighbour, complimenting your neighbour even. That might really be worth the effort. So I think overall, Jupiter moving through Leo is going to work for you. I think it's something that you should enjoy, and it might also say something about relationships. As Jupiter moves into Leo, it's possible that someone very well seems to change. They change. They maybe become sort of less defensive. They become more focused on themselves, and you could be talking about someone who is quite proud in their own way. Maybe they're becoming proud, or it just could be a change in terms of the kind of people you're dealing with. So perhaps when Jupiter was in Cancer, you were dealing with certain types of people, and with Jupiter, as Jupiter moves into Leo, you're dealing with people who maybe are more vibrant, more exciting, but at the same time probably do appreciate compliments. Okay, you don't have to just flatter people for the sake of it, but if you can say some nice things, if you can find a way of paying people compliments, I think that would really sort of smooth things along in many different ways. Cancer. Jupiter is moving out of Cancer, moving out of your sign. Now, I think in my last video I said that there might be a certain sadness as Jupiter moves out of your sign, and I was looking at the comments, and I think someone was questioning that. What do I mean? Why is it sad for Jupiter to move out of Cancer? Well, what I was really saying there was, Jupiter in Cancer is, of course, your sign. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. And so Jupiter was really strong there. And so, when Jupiter moves out of Cancer, it's not that you're sad that Jupiter is moving into Leo. You're sad that Jupiter has moved out of a sign where it was very strong, where there were particular opportunities. Maybe when Jupiter is in Leo, those opportunities aren't necessarily so available. I mean, but nothing is denied to you. It's not like you've sort of missed any chances. But with Jupiter in Cancer, I think it's likely that the emphasis is going to change. I mean, I think that there could be an increasing emphasis on money. How much money you have, how much money you need to have. Just being aware of money, perhaps more than usual. And when we're talking about Jupiter, we're talking about a planet that has, a strong relationship with your own sign. I mean, Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So you could argue that Jupiter is almost a ruler of Cancer. So when Jupiter moves out of Cancer into Leo, that does mean the emphasis changes. And yes, there could be a sort of more talk about money and resources and what you have, and what you don't have, and what you need to do to get hold of whatever you're looking for. And I think that you can, by and large, be pretty successful in this department. So if you feel you haven't got enough, then as Jupiter moves through Leo, you perhaps can find ways of getting hold of perhaps more money. If something has been denied to you, there may be a way of making the right impression, and perhaps getting properly rewarded. And it's not just about you just getting lucky. I mean, Jupiter is, of course, a planet of luck. So yeah, it is possible that with Jupiter moving through Leo, you will be lucky with money. But at the same time, you have the opportunity to actually be quite disciplined with money. And this might become apparent over the next few months, because what is happening is that Jupiter moving through Leo is starting to make a trine to Saturn, which Saturn is in Aries. And so over the next few months, Cancer, I think that you have a chance to really get yourself together, and you can think about a set of goals, something you want to achieve, also something you want to be rewarded for, and you can make it happen. But you just have to keep persevering, and also recognize and respect your own authority. You can be authoritative. People appreciate this authority, and if you use this authority in a kind of a gentle way, I think that you won't just get respect, but I think that you can also be rewarded for your efforts. And as far as today is concerned, looking at things from a sort of a more short-term perspective, okay, yeah, Jupiter's gone into Leo. Okay, you might feel Jupiter moving into Leo straight away, but Jupiter is a slow-moving planet, and so just because it's gone into Leo today doesn't mean to say you're immediately going to feel that everything has changed. It might take a few days or even a few weeks for you to get used to this changeover. But as far as today is concerned, there are similarities between today and yesterday. Yesterday I talked about the full moon. There's still a full moon. The moon is in Capricorn. It's opposition the sun. At least it's in opposition signs, because Capricorn is opposition Cancer, and so it's a time where things are becoming clear, and perhaps certain people are becoming clear. Moon in your opposite sign in Capricorn square Saturn, and it makes sense. You understand people, you understand their limitations, and if you and someone else have any incompatibilities, with this moon square Saturn. In fact, you've got the Sun applying to a square of Saturn as well. If there are any incompatibilities between you and another person, I think it will be clear. But that's a good thing. I think you're going to have sort of new insights into how to deal with certain people who may be important, people you can't just run away from, people who could be useful, if you give them the right chances. But awareness is really, really helpful. And I think that, from a sort of a work career perspective, if you are working, then I think that your ability to gently establish your authority, could actually be very useful. And you shouldn't think that anyone is permanently standing in your way. I think you've got to be able to sort of give people a chance and to perhaps understand what is motivating them. And just because someone seems unreasonable doesn't necessarily mean that is the case. I mean, everyone has their motivations, and just because someone appears to be working against your best interest doesn't necessarily mean that that is the case. So maybe there is an argument here, Cancer, for giving everyone a fair hearing. Leo. Jupiter is moving into your sign, and Jupiter stays in Leo for over a year. Stays there, I think, until July the 26th, 2027. And, Jupiter is a planet which works reasonably well in Leo. Leo is a fire sign, and Jupiter rules the fire signs by night. Sun rules the fire signs by day. So it might be the case, Leo, that you're going to be on best form in the hours of darkness rather than the hours of day. I mean, that is possible. I mean, I don't want to encourage you to be a night owl, to take night shifts, whatever. But yeah, it's just something you might want to play with, experiment with. Try doing some work in the hours of day and in the hours of night, and make a comparison. Perhaps you'll be luckier during the hours of darkness. Maybe I'm just being silly there, but I would just suggest that you consider that. But Jupiter is a fortunate planet. It is the greater benefic. And so while Jupiter is moving through Leo, you have the opportunity to be lucky. Things can work for you. And I think it pays to have a broadly optimistic approach, to think about how things could work out, and not to think about restriction, but to think about instead possibilities. And because I think that there are a great many possibilities at the moment. So don't say no to yourself. Try to find ways of turning your ideas into reality. And right now, Leo, you do have big ideas that you want to take seriously, and now perhaps it can all come together. But there's no need to be in a massive hurry. I mean, Jupiter does stay in Leo and for a long time, for over a year. So perhaps you should be thinking about what you want to achieve, and how you'd like things to be. But between now and the end of July 2027, and Jupiter, when it moves into Leo, it does start making a square to Chiron, because Chiron has just gone into Taurus, and this Jupiter square Chiron, it might well be about your individuality, you feeling that there's something you really want to express and do and project, which is very unique to you. It's not about just doing what everyone else says. I mean, we're talking about Chiron here. Chiron likes to do things differently, and it might well be that if you want to maximize your success and maximize your opportunities, you do have to be somewhat adventurous and perhaps take a few risks. I mean, risks in terms of trying things out, which might be rather unorthodox, which kind of set you apart from other people. So this Jupiter moving through Leo, I mean, okay, it's a broader trend. I'm not saying that today you're necessarily going to feel Jupiter moving through your sign immediately. I mean, you might. But you should be telling yourself that things have changed, and perhaps over the last year, Leo, you felt that you weren't fully able to express yourself. You were holding something back. There were things you didn't want to reveal. You felt the heavens were maybe not aligned, and you were kind of waiting for something to change. Well, things have changed. And so now might be a time to really give things a go and really, show the world, what you can do. And as far as today is concerned, yeah, sure, you might feel Jupiter moving through, moving into Leo, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I mean, the moon is still in Capricorn. The moon is still making an opposition to the sun, and although deep down, Leo, you just might know that things are changing, things are moving your way, that you are getting luckier. In the very short term, you just might want to take a more disciplined approach, especially with Moon in Capricorn, and you want to do things in a way that is systematic, is straightforward. Moon is not just in Capricorn, but it's also making a square to Saturn, and so with Moon in square Saturn, there may be certain things you're doing which just seem to be rather difficult. Short term, you might think that your options are being sort of restricted, and okay, that's not how you want it to be, but you also know that whatever you're doing, it is right, and there just may be things that need to be sorted out, cleared up, and perhaps just making sure that the decks are clear, because once the decks are clear, then you can really start to take advantage of Jupiter moving through your sign. Virgo. The main theme of this video is Jupiter moving into Leo, and Jupiter moving into Leo, well, it's going to affect all the 12 signs in some way. And so as far as what it means for you, Jupiter moving into Leo, well, first thing to point out, I want to jump ahead over a year and just tell you that next year, end of July 2027, Jupiter does move into your sign. So you could say that Jupiter is slowly getting ready to move into Virgo, but you've got over a year to wait. And while Jupiter is moving through Leo, it just might be a time where there are things you have to do in your own way, and there's no harm in a bit of preparation, making sure that things are perhaps done properly. And additionally, while Jupiter is in Leo, it's quite possible that you are going to value your privacy. There are things that you want to do in your own way that you don't necessarily want to discuss, and there could be a feeling of sort of discovery. You've got to discover things, you've got to work things out before you can present them to the wider world. So that is certainly a way in which Jupiter moving through Jupiter moving through Leo, could work. And additionally, you're quite sensitive at the moment. I think Jupiter in Leo is going to sort of boost your sensitivity. I mean, strange as that might sound, but it's going to perhaps be sensitive in a more sort of intuitive way. Jupiter is moving through a fire sign, and you have these sort of intuitions about the way things are moving, the way things are working, which are very clear, and you develop these intuitions very quickly. I mean, that is the nature of an intuition. It's quite immediate, and maybe you're thinking about how things are going to develop between now and next year. Perhaps you're thinking ahead to 2027. You almost know that some things are not really going to develop this year, even next year, or at least not the first half of next year. And so, many Virgos are going to be prepared to be quite patient about it. Don't feel that you have to be in a complete rush. Now, there are more complicated ways in which Jupiter in Leo could work its way through, which might relate, for example, to good works, things which are maybe of a charitable nature, you wanting to contribute to society or make people's lives better. I mean, you could see Jupiter in Leo as being about visiting institutions. I don't know why you would be visiting institutions. When I say institutions, I'm thinking particularly of places like prisons and hospitals. I'm not saying you're going to go to prison, by the way. Absolutely not. But some Virgos might, for one reason or another, find that they want to have connections with prisoners, right to prisoners, or prison reform, or might not be prison, might be hospital visits. Doing something for society. I mean, you can ignore what I'm saying, by the way, and I know this is a little bit far-fetched, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to just go through some of the symbolism of Jupiter moving through what is effectively your 12th house, because Leo in the Virgo chart is the 12th house, and so having connections with institutions and this could work in many different ways, and it just might be something it could be of a charitable nature. You doing perhaps volunteer work in some kind of institution. So I mean that's certainly a possibility, and additionally. If we're looking at other ways in which it could work, it might say something about animals. Your work with animals. When we're dealing with the 12th house, we are talking about larger animals. We're talking about animals larger than a goat, and so Virgo, if you have I don't know, if you live on a farm, then you might feel that there's a lot of emphasis on cattle, horses, and so forth. Maybe some Virgos will want to buy a horse, or if you've got the opportunity. Of course, you'd have to be in the right environment to buy a horse. I mean, it's not impossible. People do buy horses, or you might enjoy whale watching. It depends where you are. I mean, I've never gone whale watching. You don't really want to bother the whales, but that's probably not the right thing to do to watch whales, but maybe issues around the health and well-being of marine animals could relate to Jupiter. Could relate to Jupiter in Leo. Now, if we want to be negative about Jupiter in Leo, because Jupiter does exaggerate. It can exaggerate, and it can just expand an idea too far. And so Jupiter in Leo could, in certain situations, be about unreal fears. Just getting quite afraid about something, and just scared that something might be developing, which is not developing at all. It could be a fear of magic, the occult. I think, if I remember rightly, William Lilly in his casebook written in the 17th century, Christian Astrology, he talked about, I think he talked about the evil eye, or someone would have worried that there was someone sort of undermining them, or in some kind of supernatural kind of way. And if I remember rightly from his analysis of the horary chart, he did relate this to the 12th house. And so the 12th house can be about sort of unreasonable fears. So if you do find yourself having unreasonable fears over the course of the next year and more, then you could say, oh, well, that's just Jupiter in Leo, and hopefully that will help you just get things in perspective. And so that's looking at things in a sort of quite a broad sense. I mean, as far as today, Tuesday, is concerned, Mercury is of course retrograde, and I think by now you might really be starting to feel that Mercury retrograde. Certain things may just be a little bit slower than usual. It may not just be events, it may be people as well. You thought that people were going to be more forthcoming, and they're just kind of holding back on something. And so you can't rely on everyone, and just people just seem to be sort of slower to respond than usual. And it's not just because we've got Mercury retrograde. We also have a full moon. So when there's a full moon, moon in Capricorn, opposition with Sun in Cancer, it does slow things down, and perhaps makes people maybe unreliable, or might make people afraid. I mean, that is a possible way of doing it. And as far as how best to respond to the day's energies, well, I kind of repeat what I said yesterday. I think, Virgo, it's very important that you do things your way. As far as is possible, you put yourself in a position where you are not overly reliant on another person or a group of people, because people are capable of anything. They're capable of letting you down. They're capable of making promises which they don't keep, and that could really be a spanner in the works. But if you just make the assumption that no one's going to help, but it's all down to you, then that's just going to just make things easier. And if someone is reliable, if someone does honour their promise, well, that's a bonus, isn't it? Libra. Jupiter in Leo. So Jupiter moving into Leo for you, Libra, is a change, and quite how you experience Jupiter in Leo might to an extent be dependent on how you felt about Jupiter in Cancer. And if you've been listening to these my videos over the course of the last few months, or even the last year, then I've been quite optimistic about Jupiter in Cancer. And probably if you've been listening to other astrologers talking about Jupiter in Cancer, they may have said something quite similar. And I think the standard interpretation of Jupiter in Cancer from a Libra perspective would say something about ambitions, career, work, job, business, how you have been negotiating your way forward, how you could be successful if you made the effort. Maybe you're going to be lucky if an average in that direction. But now that Jupiter is moving out of Cancer into Leo, it just could be a time when your priorities start to change. Perhaps recently, your priorities have been in a way quite straightforward. You were looking perhaps for sort of money or status or success of some kind, but in a very specific way. And when Jupiter moves into Leo, you're looking at things in a sort of a kind of a more sort of broad-minded, almost spiritual way. Thinking about what is your broad destination. You might be thinking now, with Jupiter moving into Leo, about your hopes for the future. What perhaps you are wishing for, and so hopes and wishes. That's certainly a way in which Jupiter and Leo could manifest, and that's about you thinking about the kind of life you would like to lead. And if you're not leading this life right now, then perhaps you feel that you need to make some adjustments, so to make sure that you are going in the right direction, that you are actually sort of moving beyond the material. And in the process, it might be very important that you are connected with the right people. Certain people can be helpful. They can help you achieve your longer term aims. Perhaps you're on the same wavelength as them. Other people, by contrast, may just seem empty. They may offer nothing. And so it could be the case, as Jupiter moves from Cancer to Leo, that you might want to change some of your friends, change some of your social networks, focusing on a different group of people who do share your priorities. And there is a possibility, Libra, that you become a little more political, that you're thinking about what is important for society. What are your aims? Political aims. You might be thinking about your government or your municipality. If you're who's running your local council, for example. Your city council if you're in the US, maybe, or your county council. There's a county council in the United Kingdom. There are county councils, but whatever. So the political side of things might be important, and activism could also be something that you're starting to think about when Jupiter is moving through Leo. You may think that you really can make a difference, that you can participate in something, and you should be with people and with perhaps an organisation who just share your goals. It might not be political at all. It might be something religious. I don't think so. I think I'd be more focusing on something non-religious, more about sort of politics, or perhaps a shared interest, whatever that shared interest might be. It could be bird watching, basket weaving, whatever. Just people having a common interest, and that might be something that you want to think about. But I don't think there's anything wrong with Jupiter in moving into Leo, and I think that it should work quite well for you, and it allows you to start aligning to your longer term ambitions, which just go beyond things like money, success, and status. And as far as the specifics of today, Tuesday, is concerned, well, in some respects, it's quite similar to yesterday. There is this full moon. So this full moon, this Capricorn full moon, in a way, it's just a feature of both Monday and Tuesday. And this full moon, is about what makes you feel comfortable, what makes you feel secure, but also how do you address outside pressure. There is pressure to do something. There's pressure to maybe reveal your hand. Maybe there's pressure to help. There's pressure to turn up. Whatever you might have to turn up to, people. There might be a sense in which you have to be present, and you don't really want to be present. I think part of you would just prefer to just stay where you are, and perhaps you feel that if you are closely associated with other people, at least in the short term, that you're maybe losing something. I mean, you value your freedom right now. I mean, I'm talking specifically about today, Tuesday. You want to do things, in your own way, and I think that you're right to think like that. And although I do think that over the next year, it's going to be good if you are sociable. If you're sociable today, Tuesday, then I think you might just get confused, and some people may be just difficult to work out, and you may not be able to fully articulate what exactly it is that you want, and that would suggest that it's actually quite a good idea to perhaps stay somewhere where you feel happy and secure and looked after, and you shouldn't feel that you have to make any sort of bold and dramatic moves today. I mean, you'll have a chance to make bigger changes later on, but as far as today is concerned, I think to an extent you're still trying to work out the full moon. Scorpio. Jupiter in Leo. I think Scorpio is a big event. I'm hoping it's a big event. I mean, in a successful sense, because if you think about Leo, Leo is a sign which is at the top of your chart. In astrology, the sign Leo for Scorpio is associated with the 10th house, and the 10th house is connected with career, where you're heading, your ambitions. And so with Jupiter moving through Leo, it's just going to be a time when you could be more ambitious than usual. And don't forget that Jupiter stays in Leo for over a year, until the end of July of 2027. And so over the course of the next year, really think about your ambitions. It's not necessarily the case that you have to have a job, or you have to have a career or a business. It's not like that. Everyone has got ambitions, and you, Scorpio, have got ambitions, and you have to think about how you want to achieve them. And it's important that you're not distracted. I mean, you've got to be aware of other people. You've got to be aware of your family and loved ones and so forth. But there are still things to do, things that you really want to do. And you've got to really align yourself to that. And I think, in fact, you're going to find, over the next few days, I think straight away, really, but it's certainly over the next few weeks, as Jupiter moves towards an opposition of Pluto. You can see that Jupiter is at 0 degrees Leo. It's moving towards an opposition of Pluto. When is that exact Jupiter-Pluto opposition? Let me just check that out, because when you're dealing with Jupiter-Pluto, you're talking about really wanting things to be better, just not being satisfied, with the way things are. So that Jupiter-Pluto opposition is, I don't know, something like the 21st of July, something like that. So over the next few weeks, as Jupiter moves towards that opposition of Pluto, Scorpio, you're going to really want to make the most of things. You're going to want to do as well as you possibly can, and you're not going to be satisfied with second best. Okay, there might be a pressure to think about something else. You might find that there are demands on your time and your energy, but you've got to put yourself first. I think that really is okay. And if you put yourself first, then I think in the end, everyone is going to benefit. So Scorpio, as I've already suggested, think about what matters. Kind of, have a vision. How would you like things to be next July, in a year's time? And you've got all year to make it happen. So I'm optimistic about Jupiter moving through Leo for you, and Jupiter, will make a square, make a trine to Saturn, later on in a few months' time. And Jupiter trine Saturn, does indicate that you're really going to be able to get yourself together. That's something you can do. You can really get yourself together. Perhaps there's just some rather boring work that just has to be done over the next few months, because what you're doing is you're preparing the ground, and you prepare the ground, and so in a few months' time, by the beginning of September, you can really be poised for the next stage, for your next step, to move towards the achievement of your ambitions, whatever those ambitions might be. And as far as the specifics of today is concerned, one interesting aspect we have is that Mars is making a square to the true node. So with Mars making a square to a true node, on the same day as Jupiter moves into Leo, I think that could be about you being aware that there are two choices. Two choices. Mars is in Gemini. Mars is a double-bodied sign. So you see those two choices, and one of those choices is easy. It's straightforward. It doesn't really need to be thought about. It's kind of obvious. And another of those choices is more complicated. It may require more sort of emotional investment, but Scorpio, that the complicated choice is almost certainly the best choice, and the easy choice is possibly the line of least resistance. And so, what is the line of least resistance? What is going to be easiest for you to do? And if it's just too easy, maybe you should really try to challenge yourself. And we should also consider the North Node, South Node. It's not just about karma. I don't really like to use that word karma in an astrological context. I mean, who is it? How can I talk about your karma or anyone else's karma? I don't know. One doesn't want to be too spiritual in terms of one's astrology. I know that might seem a bit of a contradiction, but I don't know. I think one can get too spiritual. Yeah, one can get too spiritual and telling people about their karmic destiny and inheritance and whatever. I don't want to exaggerate that too much, and I think it is worth seeing the nodes not just in terms of things like reincarnation and the past and the future, but just to see it in terms of other people, the group, the collective. And with Mars square the North Node and the nodal axis, it might be about you having to actively interact with a group of people, or just people in general. And maybe some of these people are kind of representative of the future. They're taking you in the right direction. But other people represent the past. And again, you have to make a choice there. So there's me trying to mix the two meanings of the nodes. The nodes can be about past, future, what is your destiny, and they can be about society at large, and they can share that meaning, and they can encompass whatever that overall meaning is all about. And continuing on the people theme, not everyone can be relied on. Some people can be confusing. They can be misleading, and they can just take something which is really quite simple, and they can turn it into just a complicated mess. And if you find yourself confused in another person's company, then maybe, at least in the short term, Scorpio, you should just walk away and give yourself some space to to just think things through in your own way, and being able to think things through and to just look at things as they are is important. After all, the moon is in Capricorn. Okay, we've got a full moon. Moon in Capricorn opposition the sun in Cancer, and the sun in Cancer represents perhaps overcomplications, an overcomplication, just looking at things into perhaps in a way that is perhaps too spiritual or too far flung and esoteric, and just keep it simple. Look at the facts in front of you, and the facts in front of you will give you a pretty good idea about what your next step should be. Sagittarius. Jupiter is your ruler, and this means, Sagittarius, that we should keep a close eye on what exactly Jupiter is doing. And today Jupiter changes sign. It moves out of Cancer and into Leo. And Leo is a fire sign. It is a sign which, broadly speaking, is pretty friendly to the average Sagittarius, and and so it is about perhaps new horizons. It's about you being aware of new possibilities, and perhaps we should contrast Jupiter in Leo with Jupiter in Cancer. Now, Jupiter in Cancer, so Jupiter's been in Cancer for the last year and more, and with Jupiter in Cancer, there have been times where things were a little bit complicated, where you weren't quite sure what was going on. I think that you had an opportunity to develop real emotional depth and to understand how complicated things were. But now that Jupiter is moving through into Leo, I think that things are just becoming more straightforward. Things don't seem quite so heavy and complicated, and you can perhaps start to see the way ahead, the way forward. And Jupiter in Leo is quite sort of expansive. It can be spiritual. It can be able to sort of get some height, just be able to see what's going on around you. You're not to be looking at everything at ground level. You get some height, and you see everything, and you can kind of see where things are moving to. And it's good having Jupiter in a fire sign rather than a water sign. And with Jupiter in Leo, you can just reconnect with your fundamental abilities and your fundamental strong points. And of course, one of the strong points of the average Sagittarius is really having good intuition, just understanding how things fit together and understanding what things mean without having to analyze it too much, without having to think. It's just clear. And so some things, Sagittarius, are going to become obvious, very immediately obvious, in a way that just wasn't the case before. It's not so drawn out anymore, and you just see the way things are happening. And in the process, I think that you are able to communicate your understanding and your intuition in a way that other people are going to really, really appreciate. Now, we have to think about Jupiter and Leo in different ways. Leo in the Sagittarian horoscope, can be about your spirituality, what you believe in, and so it might be a time when you are becoming, more expansive. You're thinking just beyond the material, and perhaps it may say something about your relationship to the supernatural and the divine, and perhaps feeling that something is looking after you. And while Jupiter's in Leo, it might also be a time, Sagittarius, where you're thinking about travel. As if you've listened to these videos long enough, I'm not a big fan of just traveling just for the sake of it. I kind of prescribe to the view that excessive traveling narrows the mind, because I think that is true to an extent. Who was it? I think was it Malcolm Muggeridge who said that traveling narrows the mind. He was I think Malcolm Muggeridge wasn't he he was the English journalist who discovered Mother Teresa. Yeah. Anyway, he suggested that, I think. And so, what does that mean? The way I see it is that you travel somewhere briefly, and you travel to somewhere with all your prejudices, and your prejudices are confirmed. And so you go back home thinking, I knew it was going to be like that, and it was like that. And so this is not a time to be narrowing your mind. So, ideally traveling should be something done, with a degree of humility, and also a respect for the environment. With global warming, we don't want to sort of melt the ice cap with excessive plane travel, but it just could be that some Sagittarians feel that they should be living somewhere else. And when I say living somewhere else, I'm not talking about living, moving from one house in the same or one apartment in the same town to another. I'm perhaps talking about moving to another country or another side of a big country. Moving from the Pacific coast to the Atlantic coast, or moving from continent to continent. And that might be something that inspires you. So even if you don't have the opportunity to move to a different country, and I'm not advocating you should move to another country, but even if you don't have that opportunity, doesn't mean that you shouldn't think about it and think about, what it means and what is your relationship to your country, whatever that might be. And and in certain cases, travel might answer some of your needs. So this is something that is ongoing, and so Jupiter does stay in Leo for over a year. So you've got until the end of July 2027 to sort of work it all through. And as far as today is concerned, well, I think that by and large, you're going to find it relatively easy to express yourself. I think you can talk to most people, even if you're not necessarily in the mood. I mean, you might not be in the mood because there is still a full moon, moon in Capricorn, opposition with Sun in Cancer, so you're not entirely ready to be the life and soul of the party. At least that's not how you feel. But if you make the effort, I think that you'll express yourself extremely well, and people will listen to you. And at the same time, conversation might be a good method of discovery. We have got a full moon after all, and full moons can be about the truth, understanding the truth. And if you want to ask difficult questions about difficult subjects, you certainly can. And it might be that some of the answers you're getting kind of represent a culmination of Jupiter moving through Cancer. Jupiter had been in Cancer over a year, and now it's moving into Leo. But just as Jupiter moves into Leo, things might just start to come together. And what seemed to be complex and ever so slightly dangerous might suddenly simplify. And after that, it's just sort of easy, or relatively easy, to start to contemplate, what it means to make the most of Jupiter in Leo. So overall, Sagittarius, I think you've got a lot to look forward to, and I think that Jupiter moving into Leo is going to really work for you. Capricorn, the moon is still moving through your sign, and it's still making an opposition to the sun. So moon opposition sun, well, that's the definition of a full moon. So the full moon is still very much in operation, and of course it's impacting the main axis of your chart. So this is a time, Capricorn, where like yesterday, you have access to the truth. You have an opportunity to see things as they are, and this particularly applies to other people and to relationships. Sometimes people can be difficult to figure out, and you're not quite sure what they're doing, what they mean, and now it's clear. But Capricorn, part of you kind of doesn't really want to bother. You'd rather leave people to their own devices and not speculate about what people are like, what people's motivations and intentions are. But some things just can't be helped, and if knowledge is available, then I would take that knowledge. Short term, it might seem of little value. Do you really need to analyze what people are like? But in a longer term, it's good to know. And it's good to know who your friends are. It's good to know who you can trust. It's also good to know how other people are going to behave in a crisis, and whether people are going to treat you with respect. And if you've got something you need, are they going to be in a position to offer it to you? And while this full moon continues, we've also got Jupiter moving out of Cancer. So Jupiter is Jupiter's no longer in Cancer, and so good opportunity to reflect on whether Jupiter in Cancer has worked. So you've had Jupiter in your opposite sign, and I've said that while Jupiter was moving through Cancer, maybe relationships were more important than usual. Maybe your demands and expectations were higher than usual. You wanted people to, maybe come up with the goods. You had high expectations, but maybe they weren't always able to deliver. But you still had to accept that certain other people couldn't be avoided. But when Jupiter moves out of Cancer into Leo, then you could say that you might become more self-contained over the next year, remembering that Jupiter is going to stay in Leo until the end of July of 2027. And so while Jupiter is in Leo, there might be things you have to work through. And you have to perhaps accept that, certain things are complicated. And it's not just about people in general. It's also about, agreements. Agreements have to be analysed. And, money, complicated money. For example, legacies, trusts, that kind of thing. So, being a Capricorn, you're quite good at really understanding what something is about, especially on a material and financial level. So if there are any agreements which you have just assumed have all been signed and are all okay, just have another look at them with Jupiter moving through Leo. And you may be in a position to make some changes or to make some complaints. And if the small print doesn't satisfy you, then maybe there is something you can do about it. And also with Jupiter in Leo, it could be a good time to make agreements. And you will have just a good idea of what needs to be said, how the various clauses of an agreement need to be put together. And if you haven't made a will, I'm sorry to be morbid, but if you haven't made a will with Jupiter moving into Leo, moving through Leo, maybe it's a good idea to do that. Or if you've already made a will with Jupiter in Leo, you might want to have another look at that will. Is it written properly? Have you really taken into account the various complications that might suddenly sort of manifest, if the worst were to happen. I'm sorry to talk about wills, but we need to look at what it means for Jupiter to be in Leo if you're a Capricorn. But it does make things a little more complicated, Jupiter moving through Leo. But I think that Capricorn, you're going to be very good at dealing with these complications. So nothing is so complicated, Capricorn, that you can't handle it. And in fact, if you're prepared to get involved in complicated things, I think that you could benefit, perhaps in a financial way. So, in one sense, it's kind of more of the same, at least in the short term, because this full moon, it just continues. But in another sense, Jupiter changing sign is, it is quite major. But I think Jupiter moving into Libra, into Leo, I think makes you more powerful. It gives you greater gravitas, and the average Capricorn usually has quite a lot of gravitas. You're not someone to be taken lightly, and with Jupiter moving into Leo, that gravitas is very much added to. But when I say gravitas, and when I'm thinking about seriousness, I don't want to give the impression that you're a dead weight. Certainly not today. I mean, and at the moment, I think that Capricorn, you're very aware of what is possible, and you kind of have a confidence that if you're given the right opportunity, you can really make the most of everything, and you can make the most of a changing world. And of course the world is changing, and Capricorn, you of all people know how much it is changing. And now is a great opportunity to understand these changes and ensure that these changes work for you rather than against you. Aquarius. Jupiter is moving into Leo, and from an Aquarian perspective, that's quite important. I mean, after all, Leo is your opposite sign. So when Jupiter moves into Leo, and of course it stays in Leo for sort of over a year, it can be a time when relationships become quite important. I mean, you've already got Venus moving through Leo, and so I don't know how you've experienced Venus moving through Leo, but there may be just certain people who just cannot be ignored. And you know that you can't do everything on your own. Even if you want to do everything on your own, still it's just not entirely possible. And now that you've got Jupiter and Venus moving through Leo, well, you could say this is really good. This might be a time that when you can really benefit from other people. I mean, Venus stays in Leo until, I don't know, is it July the 11th, something like that. So you've got nearly a fortnight of having both Jupiter and Venus in Leo. Just see what other people have to offer, and as far as relationships are concerned, I mean, I'm confident that things can work for you if you do give people a chance. But Jupiter does stay in Leo till the end of July, so Venus might change sign, but quite pretty soon, but not Jupiter, and so perhaps think about relationships, in a more sort of long-term perspective. What kind of relationships do you want to be in? And bear in mind that right now you're going to have pretty high expectations. You expect people to deliver, and if they don't deliver, you're not necessarily going to tolerate that, and perhaps you'll want to move on to new pastures, or you'll want to give someone a piece of your mind, telling them that it's not good enough, it needs to be better. And so that there are a number of ways in which Jupiter and Leo could work out, and things can be done in a partnership, whatever it is. So you don't necessarily have to do things all by yourself. As an Aquarian, you perhaps are inclined to think that you should be doing it on your own. You don't need other people's help. You can be self-sufficient. Maybe you can be self-sufficient, but I think things would be even better if you were to form the right partnership, or perhaps we're talking about, a temporary accommodation where you can help someone, they can help you, at least in the short term. So I think there are a number of ways in which you can benefit from having a Jupiter moving through Leo, your opposite sign. And as far as the specifics of today, Tuesday, are concerned, it's still got this full moon. I mean, the moon is still in Capricorn. It's still kind of making an opposition to the sun. And even though Jupiter's moved into Leo, and I've just said that, you can benefit from other people, very short term, I don't think you're really in the mood for sort of wild socializing today, Tuesday. I think you'd prefer to do things on your own, work things out carefully in your own way, and there are certain things you do want to keep to yourself for the moment. And maybe you're just doing some preparation, and if you were to act too quickly, that might not work out. But I mean, I think that probably tomorrow, when the moon moves into Aquarius, into your sign, that things are probably going to be easier, and you're going to be sort of more inclined to take action, more inclined to interact with the people around you. Pisces. Jupiter rules Pisces. It's not Neptune. I mean, at least that's my view. I'm a traditionalist. I regard Neptune as being a discovered planet. So Neptune was discovered in the middle of the 19th century, and it has a certain affinity with Pisces, but I don't regard Neptune as the ruler of Pisces. One reason that I don't think Neptune rules Pisces is because some of the minor dignities, there are minor dignities in astrology, like decanates and terms and triplicities, and Neptune is not part of that framework. And we can't make it part of that framework. It is separate, and so I just find it difficult to contemplate Neptune ruling Pisces. And so instead we got Jupiter ruling Pisces, and so when Jupiter changes sign, that should have an impact on you. And so what we've had Jupiter in Cancer, and I've been really enthusiastic about Jupiter in Cancer. I really thought that Jupiter in Cancer could have really worked for you. Hopefully it did. Hopefully the last year was a time, Pisces, when you were able to be very creative, you were able to use your talents to the absolute maximum, and now you feel in a better position than you did a year ago, or at least more able to use your God-given abilities than a year ago. But now we've got Jupiter changing sign, moving out of Cancer into Leo. Leo is a sign which is rather different from Pisces. These are two different signs. Leo is a fire sign. It's a fixed fire sign. Pisces is a mutable water sign. What is the connection between Leo and Pisces? Well, not very much. And so when Jupiter moves into Leo, it just could be a time where you do have to be more organized and look at things in a different way. I mean, when Jupiter was in Cancer in a water sign, you had all the flow, it was nice and watery, you kind of felt yourself to be in your own element. And so when Jupiter moves into Leo, it might at first feel rather uncomfortable. It might kind of seem to be a new world where there are pressures on you which didn't exist before, and part of that pressure might be to do things in a particular way. It's all very well having some amazing talents, but talent on its own is pretty meaningless. You've got to harness those talents, you've got to focus the talent, and maybe that's what Jupiter moving into Leo is all about. It's having the discipline to make the most of what you have. You can no longer just do things in a vague and random way. You have to decide what exactly it is that you want to achieve, and also, do you have the strength to see it through? I mean, I'm sure you do have the strength to see it through, but that might mean that you do have to start to look after yourself. And while Jupiter is moving through Leo between now and the end of July of next year, 2027, do think about your own health and your own well-being. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong, but I mean, I think that things perhaps could be better. Perhaps there have been certain things you've been recently neglecting. You kind of know in theory what you need to do and what you need to not do and what you need to give up. But in practice, maybe you haven't always been able to see it through. But I think that with Jupiter in Leo, you have a chance to kind of stop, slow down, think about your body, think about what your body needs, and then sort of align yourself to this new reality. And in a more sort of short-term sense, today, Tuesday, we've still got a full moon. The moon is still in Capricorn, and it's making an opposition to the sun in Cancer. Okay, it's separating from that opposition to the sun in Cancer, but there's still that polarity between the sun and the moon. And perhaps Pisces, like yesterday, it's a time to think about who you are and what you're able to do, but to maybe be able to also address it to an audience. So it's all very well having an ability, but is it properly recognized? And you might feel that certain people are not on your wavelength, and that you can't entirely express yourself, and you can't show people what you can do. But the full moon does present something of a challenge. And if you make a special effort to show what you can do, to demonstrate your various abilities, I think you'll in the end be able to get through, because fundamentally at the moment, Pisces, you are actually very, very sociable. You have a natural sociableness to you, and I think that people are going to like you. And as Jupiter moves from Cancer to Leo, that perhaps gives you a sense of consideration. You start to understand what people are looking for, what people need, and you can just slow down at a critical moment and perhaps observe what people are thinking, what people are looking at, and then you can provide it. And in the process, they'll start to appreciate you, and you'll get a chance to really express yourself in a way that is both creative and healthy. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now it's time to turn to the I Ching. So I ask the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 18, which is illness. Illness. Well, Greg Winkup, in his translation of I Ching, he described this I Ching as illness. The Wilhelm translation describes it as work on what has been spoilt. And, the image that Wilhelm gives is of really decay, a can of worms, something that has perhaps been neglected. And we're getting rot and decay and infestation here. And so, it doesn't sound good. But I don't want to exaggerate the problem. I am not saying you're going to get ill today. And when we talk about illness, in sort of I Ching language, we're talking about a situation that can be resolved. There's nothing incurable about this illness. It's just something is wrong, and it is something wrong. The reason it's wrong is because of a past. Something has been done in the past, and in this hexagram we have the second line moving, and with the second line from the bottom moving, it seems that we're talking about. In fact, the I Ching talks about the actions of the mother. So, I mean, okay, we could take it literally. I mean, it could be that there are problems you are facing at the moment because of what your mother has done. I mean, that is a rather literal interpretation, and it could be of something a mother has done decades ago. I mean, okay, we could get psychological about it, but maybe we shouldn't get hung up on that symbolism, and instead say, well, perhaps recently the mistakes that have occurred have perhaps happened because someone has not been strong enough, because of sort of weakness in the past. So there you see the sort of I Ching philosophy at work, because you have to remember that the I Ching is has quite a hierarchical view of the world. It is quite sort of Confucian, looking at the traditional family, father, mother, 2 sons, 2 daughters, all that kind of stuff. And so when it says weakness, the I Ching has this sort of, I mean prejudice is the wrong word, but it would kind of see the woman as the weak element, the father as a strong element. So if it's not the sins of a mother, but perhaps the mistakes of a mother, that's why one can perhaps see it as being a mistake taking place through weakness. But don't get offended by these sort of gender references, because this is the I Ching. I mean, that is kind of the nature of the oracle. So perhaps in the past someone has not been strong enough, someone has been weak, they have not aggressively sought to root out a particular problem, and now you feel that you might be dealing with it. And as far as the response is concerned, or at least the best response, it seems to be not too dramatic, not necessarily be looking for some sort of immediate resolution to take really strong action. Instead, just to be sort of quite sort of relaxed about it. Okay, not necessarily relaxed, but not to push the matter too far. But really, there is this implication here, that the thing can be resolved, but it just does take a bit of time. And with this moving line, that does mean we move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 52, which is keeping still. So that really emphasizes the point. It's not a time to be responding immediately to a particular problem, and slowly we can resolve it. And it just means that we shouldn't necessarily do very much, and we can sort of work out perhaps what our best strategy is, and really that is about it. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.